She was 7 years old, sitting alone on a highway guardrail as the storm moved in. 3 hours, 4 foster homes in 2 years. She had stopped expecting anyone to stop. Then 6'2" of leather and tattoos rolled onto the shoulder. Half of Tucson crossed the street to avoid this man. Parents pulled their children close when he walked past. The kind of face people decided things about before he'd spoken a single word. She looked at him, really looked, and asked the one question nobody else had thought to give her. "Do you know someone who wants a daughter?" What he did next would surprise everyone who thought they knew who he was, including himself. Wade Callahan had been riding for 26 years. He knew every crack in the asphalt between Tucson and the Mexican border, every gas station that sold decent coffee, every stretch of highway where the wind hit you sideways and tried to knock you off your bike. He knew the desert the way other men knew their wives, not because it was kind, but because it never pretended to be something it wasn't. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October when everything changed. The sky over the Sonoran Desert had turned that particular shade of bruised purple that comes just before a storm, and Wade was heading back into Tucson after a solo run to Benson. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was these days. Retirement from the Iron Wolves, the Tucson chapter's satellite club, had given him more time than he knew what to do with, and the road was still the only place that made sense. He spotted her about 2 miles outside of town, at the junction of Old Vale Road and Highway 83. She was sitting on a guardrail, small, maybe 6 or 7 years old, brown hair tangled by the wind, a pink backpack on the ground beside her, and the kind of stillness that doesn't belong to children. Children fidget, children cry, they run toward things or away from things. This one just sat there, watching the cars go by the way old men watch sunsets, like she had already made peace with something. Wade slowed without knowing why. He told himself it was because of the weather. He told himself a kid alone on a highway shoulder in October was a liability, not his problem, but also not something you just rode past. He told himself a lot of things. He pulled over about 30 yards ahead of her, killed the engine, and sat for a moment. In his rearview mirror, he could see she hadn't moved. She was watching him, though. That much was clear. He swung off the bike, 6'2", 230 pounds, wearing a leather vest, faded black, with years of sun and road. His arms were covered from wrist to collar in ink, a skull on his right forearm, a desert hawk on his left, names and dates and symbols that meant things he rarely explained. His beard was thick and grey-streaked, and his face had the kind of lines that come not just from age, but from decisions. He walked toward her slowly, the way you approach something wild that hasn't decided whether to run yet. She didn't run. She watched him come. "You lost?" he asked, stopping about 5 feet away. She shook her head. "You waiting for someone?" She thought about it. "Not anymore," she said. Her voice was small but clear, the kind of voice that has learned not to expect much from the people it speaks to. Wade had heard that voice before. He'd used it himself, at a different age, in a different desert town. "Where are you supposed to be?" he asked. She looked at the highway. "I was at the Millers, but I don't think they want me there anymore." The Millers, my foster family. She said the word the way adults say mortgage, like it's a necessary thing that doesn't belong to you. "They got into a fight last night, and Mrs. Miller said she had too much going on." She paused. She said it a lot of times. Wade looked up and down the road. No cars had stopped. A semi blew past doing 70, and the girl's hair whipped sideways. She didn't flinch. "How long have you been sitting here?" "Since the school bus dropped me off." She glanced at the sky. "I think that was a while ago." He pulled out his phone. No signal. He looked at the storm building to the west. The temperature had already dropped 6 degrees since he'd left Benson. "You have a name?" "Lily." "Wade," he said, and didn't offer a hand because he wasn't sure she'd take it. "I know who you are," she said. He raised an eyebrow. You come to the diner on Speedway sometimes. Pearl always says be nice to you because you tip good. A pause. She also says you look like trouble. Something crossed his face that wasn't quite a smile. Pearl's not wrong. Lily studied him for a moment with those green eyes, the kind of steady, unafraid gaze that children have before the world teaches them to look away. Are you trouble? She asked. Depends on who you ask. She seemed to consider this. Are you trouble to kids? No. Okay. She slid off the guardrail and picked up her backpack. Can I wait near your motorcycle? It's warmer. Wade stood there for a moment, looking at this 7-year-old who had just decided, with absolute calm, that a Hell's Angel-affiliated biker was a safer bet than an empty highway in a coming storm. He didn't know what to do with that. Yeah, he said. Come on. They walked back to the bike together, Lily 2 steps to his left, her sneakers crunching on the gravel shoulder. The sky was getting darker. In the distance, thunder rolled across the Rincon Mountains like a slow exhale. Wade called 911 from the bike's Bluetooth once he got a bar of signal. He reported a child alone on Highway 83, gave their exact location, and was told a unit would be there in approximately 40 minutes. 40 minutes. He looked at the storm. He looked at Lily, who had set her backpack down next to the front wheel and was looking at the bike's chrome exhaust pipe with quiet interest. Does it get hot? She asked, pointing at it. Very. How hot? Hot enough that you shouldn't touch it. She pulled her hand back. Okay. 40 minutes, he thought. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a worn denim jacket, a spare he kept for cold runs, and held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. It's clean, he said. She took it and put it on. It went down to her knees. The first drops of rain hit the asphalt. Wade made a decision that surprised even himself. He wasn't going to leave a 7-year-old on the side of a highway in a rainstorm for 40 minutes, waiting for a patrol car. He wasn't built for a lot of things, but he knew that much. He called 911 back, gave them the address of Pearl's Diner on East Speedway Boulevard, and said that's where they'd be. The dispatcher paused, the way dispatchers pause when something doesn't fit the script, and then confirmed. You got a helmet? He asked Lily. She shook her head. He dug out the only other helmet he carried, a spare half-shell he kept in the right saddlebag for no reason he'd ever examined too closely, and held it out. It was too big for her by a lot. He tightened the chin strap as far as it would go, which still left it loose. Hold on to me, he said. Both arms. Don't let go for any reason. She nodded with the seriousness of someone being briefed before a surgery. He started the engine. She climbed up behind him with some difficulty. The bike was tall and her legs were short, and wrapped both arms around his midsection. Her grip was surprisingly firm. He pulled out slowly, kept it under 40 the whole way. The rain had started in earnest by the time they reached Speedway, and the neon sign of Pearl's Diner glowed orange through the water-streaked air. He parked, helped Lily off the bike, and they walked inside. Pearl's Diner was the kind of place that had been decorated in the 1970s and never fully recovered. Vinyl booths in faded red, laminate countertops, a jukebox in the corner that still worked, but only if you kicked it gently on the left side. The smell of coffee and bacon grease was permanent, embedded in the walls like insulation. Pearl Dawson herself was behind the counter, 63 years old, with white hair pinned up and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She'd known Wade for 11 years. She'd also never seen him walk into her diner with a child. She stopped pouring coffee mid-cup. Wade, I need 2 hot chocolates and a booth, he said. Pearl set down the coffee pot. She looked at Lily, who was standing slightly behind Wade's arm, still wearing the enormous denim jacket. Her wet hair was plastered to her cheeks. Honey, Pearl said, coming around the counter immediately, you are soaked through. Let me get you a towel. Lily looked up at Wade as if asking permission. He nodded once. She went with Pearl. Wade took a booth near the window. He could see the rain hitting the parking lot in sheets now. He thought about the guardrail on Highway 83, about how long she'd been sitting there before he came along. Pearl came back with Lily, who now had a dry towel around her shoulders and had been given a menu to look at. Not because anyone expected her to order from it, but because Pearl understood that giving a child something to hold on to was its own form of comfort. Pearl slid into the seat across from Wade while Lily examined the menu with intense focus. "What happened?" Pearl asked quietly. "Found her on the highway. Foster family situation." Pearl's expression moved through several things at once. "Does anyone know she's here? Cops are on their way. Should be 20 minutes. Pearl nodded. She looked at Lily. "You hungry, sweetheart?" Lily looked up from the menu. "Is grilled cheese expensive?" "It's on the house tonight," Pearl said. Lily looked at Wade, then back at Pearl. "Okay, thank you." Pearl went to put in the order. Lily set the menu down and folded her hands on the table. Outside, lightning flashed over the Catalina Mountains. "Are you going to tell them I was bad?" Lily asked. Wade frowned. "Who?" "The police. When they come. You weren't bad. Mrs. Miller said I was too much, that I asked too many questions and I didn't sleep right and I was always underfoot. She said it without self-pity, reciting facts. Maybe that's a kind of bad." "That's not bad," Wade said. "That's just being a kid." "I've been in 4 foster houses," she said, "in 2 years. He didn't say anything. "The Garcias were nice, but they moved to Albuquerque. The Hendersons had a baby and said they didn't have room anymore. The Pruitts—" She stopped. Something closed in her face. "I only stayed there 3 weeks. Wade didn't ask about the Pruitts. "How old are you?" she asked him. 44. "Do you have kids?" "No." "Did you ever want any?" It was such a direct question, delivered so plainly, that it caught him somewhere under the ribs. He'd had a relationship 15 years ago, a woman named Carla, who'd given him 2 years and then left because she said she couldn't compete with the road. There had been talks about a future. Then there hadn't been. "I don't know," he said, which was more honest than most things he said. Pearl brought the hot chocolate. Lily wrapped both hands around the mug and took a careful sip. "It's good," she told Pearl. "Secret's extra cocoa," Pearl said, and went back to the counter. Officer Dennis Harwick arrived 22 minutes later, uniformed, mid-40s, with the careful non-expression of someone who'd worked child welfare cases long enough to develop professional distance. He came in, spotted Wade, and his face did something complicated. He knew Wade by reputation. Most of Tucson law enforcement did. "Mr. Callahan," he said. "Officer." Harwick looked at Lily, who was eating her grilled cheese with systematic focus, starting from the corners. "Hi there," Harwick said, sitting down carefully at the edge of the booth. "You must be Lily. I'm Officer Harwick. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Lily said. "Wade got me out of the rain." Harwick looked at Wade again, recalibrating something. He went through the necessary questions. Lily answered them calmly and with precision. The address of the Miller house, Mrs. Miller's first name, the name of her caseworker. She'd clearly been through versions of this process before. That was the worst part, Wade thought. Not that she was scared, that she wasn't. Harwick stepped away to make a call. Wade sat with Lily while she finished her sandwich. "Where will I go tonight?" she asked. "They'll find you a place," Wade said. "I know." She took a sip of hot chocolate. "I just wondered if it would be nice." Wade looked out the rain-streaked window. The storm had settled into a steady grey downpour. A family of 4 was hurrying across the parking lot under an umbrella, laughing about something. A man was holding a little girl on his hip, shielding her from the rain with his jacket. Lily was watching them too. She turned back to Wade. "Do you know someone who wants a daughter?" she asked. The question sat in the air between them like the last note of a song. Wade didn't answer. He didn't have one. Or maybe he had too many answers, and none of them were ready yet. Harwick came back before either of them spoke again. The Department of Child Safety placed Lily in an emergency foster home that night. A woman named Ruth Calloway on the east side of Tucson, who had been doing emergency placements for 9 years and was known, according to Sandra Reeves, for being steady and warm. Wade knew none of this until 3 days later. He'd gone back to his routine: coffee, ride, the garage where he worked part-time fixing bikes for the club, and a few private clients. He told himself he'd done what needed doing, got the kid out of the rain, called the cops, stayed until they came. That was more than most people would have done. He told himself he didn't think about her. He was at Pearl's on Sunday morning when Sandra Reeves walked in. He recognized her from that night. She'd arrived at the diner about 40 minutes after Harwick, a woman in her late 30s with a lanyard around her neck and the look of someone who'd been making difficult phone calls all evening. She'd thanked him briefly, professionally, and taken Lily away in a state-issue sedan. Now she came in, spotted him, and came straight to his booth. That was not a coincidence. "Mr. Callahan." She sat down without being invited. "I'm Sandra Reeves. We met Thursday. I remember. I wanted to thank you properly. If you hadn't stopped." She paused. The temperature dropped to 41 degrees that night. She'd been on that guardrail for almost 3 hours. Wade looked at his coffee. "She asked about you," Sandra said. "Lily, she asked if I knew you, if you were a good person." "What did you tell her?" Sandra studied him for a moment. "I told her I didn't know you well enough to say." He almost smiled. "Fair." "She told me what she asked you, in the diner." Sandra kept her voice neutral, but her eyes were watching him carefully. "About finding someone who wants a daughter." The counter noise seemed to get slightly louder, or maybe just the silence at their table got thicker. "She asks that sometimes," Sandra said, "when she feels safe enough to ask, which is not often." A pause. "She felt safe enough with you." Wade said nothing. "I'm not here to recruit you," Sandra said, and her voice was clear about that. "I'm here because Lily specifically asked me to find out if you were okay. She was worried about you riding in the rain." Something shifted somewhere behind Wade's sternum. "She's a child with very few people in her world," Sandra continued. "The ones she trusts, she takes seriously. I think you made an impression." "I gave her a jacket and a hot chocolate," Wade said. "That's not impressive. That's basic." "For Lily, that's been rare enough to be impressive," Sandra said quietly. After Sandra left, Wade sat in the booth for a long time. Pearl refilled his coffee twice without comment. The Sunday crowd came and went around him. Couples, families, a group of motorcyclists from out of town who took the big corner booth and laughed too loud. A man at the counter read a newspaper. A toddler threw a spoon. The ordinary world, going about its business. Wade thought about what people saw when they looked at him. He knew the answer because he'd watched it happen his entire adult life. The slight stiffening, the redirected gaze, the way strangers on sidewalks gave him a wider berth. He'd never minded. He'd cultivated it in certain years because distance was easier than explanation. What he hadn't expected, ever in 44 years, was a 7-year-old girl on a guardrail who looked at his vest and his tattoos and his grey-streaked beard and said, essentially, "You'll do." He went to the garage that afternoon and worked on a vintage 1978 shovelhead that belonged to a club brother named Hank Mercer, who'd had it in pieces for 2 years. Hank was there, eating chips from a bag and offering unrequested opinions. "You seem off," Hank said eventually. "I'm fine." "You rebuilt that carburetor twice." Wade set down the wrench. "Remember that situation Thursday? Kid on the highway? Pearl told me." Hank, to his credit, did not make the predictable joke. He'd been in the club long enough to know that certain things weren't funny. "She okay?" "She's in an emergency placement. She's been through 4 homes in 2 years. Hank was quiet for a moment. "That's rough." She asked me. Wade stopped. Hank waited. Nothing. Wade picked up the wrench. Wade. She asked if I knew someone who wanted a daughter. He said it flat, not looking up. A 7-year-old on a highway, that's what she asked. The garage was quiet except for the rain that had started up again outside, hitting the metal roof in a steady percussion. "What'd you say?" Hank asked. Nothing. The cop came back. Hank folded his chip bag closed. "What do you want to say?" "I don't know what I want." And that was the truest thing Wade Callahan had said out loud in years. I'm 44. I live alone. I don't have a stable income. I've got a record. 2 DUIs in the 90s and an assault charge that got dropped, but it's still there. He stopped again. "I've never done any of this." "Nobody has," Hank said, "until they do." Wade looked at him. "My sister did foster care," Hank said. "Took in a 15-year-old nobody else would take. Kid had 3 priors and an attitude problem. She decided." He shrugged. "Now the kid's 28 and runs an HVAC company in Phoenix. Calls her every Sunday." Wade looked back at the engine. "I'm not saying you should do anything," Hank said. "I'm saying wanting to is its own kind of information." That night, Wade drove home through the wet streets of Tucson and sat in his kitchen, a kitchen that had always been too big for one person, in a house that had 3 bedrooms for no reason he'd ever justified, and thought about a girl who'd spent 3 hours on a guardrail waiting for someone to stop. He thought about the way she'd asked for grilled cheese and worried about the price. He thought about the Pruitts and the way her face had closed when she said the name. He thought about what people saw when they looked at him and what Lily had seen instead. He picked up his phone and found Sandra Reeves' card. He looked at it for a long time. He set it on the table. He picked it up again. Sandra Reeves had been a caseworker for 14 years. She had seen people walk into foster care for every reason imaginable: loneliness, altruism, financial assistance, genuine love, and sometimes something harder to name: a recognition, a pull, a sense that a particular child was meant to cross a particular threshold. She had learned to tell the difference between people who thought they wanted to help and people who understood what help actually cost. When Wade Callahan called her on Sunday night, she listened carefully. He didn't say what she expected. He didn't say, "I want to foster Lily," or "I've been thinking about it," in any soft or hopeful way. He said, "I want to know what the actual process is, realistically, for someone with my background." She told him. It was not a short conversation. The foster care licensing process in Arizona required a background check, home study, training courses, interviews, and approval from the department. A criminal record was not automatically disqualifying. It depended on the nature and recency of the offenses. His 2 DUI convictions from the 1990s were old enough to be considered. The dropped assault charge would be reviewed, but was unlikely to be a barrier given the outcome. His income, while modest, cleared the basic threshold. His home, a 3-bedroom on the southeast side, would need to pass a safety inspection. It was possible, she said. Difficult and long, the process typically took 4 to 6 months, but possible. He asked about Lily specifically. Sandra chose her next words with care. "Lily is a child with significant needs. She has experienced repeated placement disruptions, which creates attachment challenges. Any placement for Lily would require a commitment to a long-term relationship, not just temporary care." "I understand long-term," he said. "Do you understand what it means for a 7-year-old who has been left 4 times? Her voice was not unkind. It was precise. "It means she will test you. Not maliciously. She won't even know she's doing it. She'll do things that make you want to give up, because some part of her is waiting to be given up on again. That's what 4 placements in 2 years does to a child's psychology." A long silence. "I'm not trying to discourage you," Sandra said. "I'm telling you what's real. I know what's real. Wade said. I grew up in the system. Another silence, different this time. Different state, he said, different decade. But I know what a fourth placement feels like from the inside. Sandra took that in. I didn't know that. Most people don't. She set up an informational meeting for Wednesday. Wade came in wearing a clean flannel shirt instead of his vest. Not because he was hiding anything, she sensed, but because he understood the difference between who you are and what you lead with. He sat across from Sandra and a licensing specialist named Tom Briggs, who had been reviewing cases for 20 years and was not easily impressed. Tom asked the questions he always asked. Why foster care? Why now? What do you know about trauma-informed parenting? What does your support system look like? Wade answered slowly and without pretense. He said he didn't know much about trauma-informed parenting, but he was prepared to learn. He said his support system was limited but real. Hank, Pearl, a few others who'd known him for years. He said he had no illusions about being prepared. He said he just knew that the kid had asked a question and he hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. Tom Briggs looked at him for a moment. Then he wrote something down. 2 days after the meeting, Sandra arranged a supervised visit at a park near the Reed Park Zoo, where the desert willows were still holding onto their last leaves, and the afternoon was cold but clear. Wade arrived first. He stood near a picnic table with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching a group of kids on the playground, looking like exactly what he was, a man who had no idea what he was doing, but had decided to do it anyway. Lily came with Sandra. She spotted Wade from 20 yards away. She walked toward him, not running, because Lily Bennett had learned somewhere along the way not to run toward things, but steadily, purposefully, as if covering the distance was itself the point. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "You came." "I said I would." She hadn't known that. He hadn't told her. But something in the way she exhaled suggested she'd hoped it. They sat at the picnic table. Sandra stayed at a respectful distance, close enough to supervise, far enough to give them air. Lily talked. She was different from the child on the guardrail. Not more guarded exactly, but more present, as if she'd decided to be actually there instead of quietly enduring. She told him about Ruth's house, which had a dog named Captain who was very old and slept on the couch. She told him that her school in Tucson was actually okay, that her teacher, Ms. Flores, let students draw on the desks with dry erase markers on Fridays. She told him that she didn't like mornings, but she was trying. She asked him questions too. What kind of bikes he liked, whether he'd been to the Sonoran Desert Museum, what he ate for breakfast. She absorbed his answers with serious attention, as if cataloguing them. At one point she asked with no preamble, "Is your house big?" 3 bedrooms, more space than I need. "Are there other kids there?" "Just me." She nodded slowly. "What's the neighborhood like?" He almost smiled. "Quiet, got a yard. There's a family 2 houses down with a trampoline." She processed this. Then, with the terrible honesty of a child who has been disappointed enough times to dispense with hope as decoration, "If something happens and it doesn't work out, will you tell me? Instead of just, will you tell me the reason?" The question hit him like a fist he hadn't seen coming. He looked at her, 7 years old, green eyes steady, asking for the one thing nobody had apparently thought to offer her, a straight answer. "Yes," he said. "I'll tell you the reason." "Okay," she said, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked like a child. Not a small adult in an oversized jacket, not a quiet presence managing her own existence. A child, briefly, in the afternoon light. "Wade," she said. "Yeah. Captain bit a mailman once, but Ruth says he's mostly better now." He did smile then, and it rearranged his whole face into something none of the people who feared him would have recognized. "Good to know," he said. The licensing process took 5 months and 12 days. Wade completed 40 hours of required training over 8 weekends, modules on child development, trauma-informed care, behavior management, and the specific challenges of children who had experienced multiple placement disruptions. He sat in conference rooms in a state building on West Jefferson Street with other prospective foster parents, couples in their 30s, a retired teacher from Marana, a single woman who wanted to specialize in teenagers, and he was, without exception, the most conspicuous person in the room. People noticed him. They always did. He was used to the sideways glances, the slight repositioning of chairs, the careful avoidance of direct conversation during breaks. What was different now was that it bothered him less than it ever had. Not because he'd stopped noticing, but because he'd decided he had somewhere to be, and the opinions of strangers in a conference room were not the thing that was going to stop him. On the fourth weekend, a woman in the training named Beverly, retired, grey-haired, with the calm authority of someone who had seen everything, sat next to him during the lunch break. "You've done this before," she said. It wasn't a question. No, not the classes, the rest of it. She nodded at something she seemed to see clearly. "You know what a kid feels like when they've been failed. Not from a textbook." He looked at her. "I had a sister in the system," she said. "I spent my whole career in education trying to make up for not being able to take her in." A pause. "I always wondered what it would have meant to her if someone had just stopped." The home study was conducted by a licensing specialist named Patricia Cole, who spent 3 hours at Wade's house on a Tuesday in January, examining every room, checking smoke detectors, reviewing storage of medications and cleaning products, inspecting the yard. She asked him questions about his daily schedule, his financial situation, his social supports, his relationship with authority, his understanding of Lily's history. He answered everything. At the end, standing in the kitchen that had always been too big for one person, Patricia Cole looked around the room and said, "You've already started, haven't you?" He looked at her. She nodded at the kitchen table where a child's placemat, the kind with the United States map on it, was sitting beside a stack of books, a children's atlas, a book about the Sonoran Desert, a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web that Pearl had recommended because she said it was perfect for green-eyed girls who took things seriously. "Just in case," he said. Patricia Cole wrote something in her file. The approval came through on a Thursday, the same day of the week, Lily would point out later, that Wade had found her on the highway. Sandra called Wade first, then went to tell Lily herself. By all accounts, Lily received the news by sitting completely still for 20 seconds and then saying, "Can I bring Captain a bone from my house?" Ruth Calloway said that was fine. Wade picked Lily up on a Saturday morning in March, when the desert was doing the brief, improbable thing it does in late winter, blooming. The saguaros along the road were beginning to show their first buds. The brittle bush was yellow. The sky was the particular clear blue that seems to apologize for everything October put you through. He pulled up to Ruth's house in his truck. He'd bought the truck specifically, a used F-150 that Hank had helped him inspect, because you could not take a 7-year-old to school on a motorcycle, and Wade Callahan had apparently become someone who thought about things like that. Lily came out with a pink backpack. The same one from the guardrail, he'd find out later, the only thing she'd kept from one home to the next, and a grocery bag containing 2 books, a stuffed armadillo, and a dog bone for Captain that she'd bought with her own saved allowance to say goodbye. Ruth Calloway hugged her at the door. Lily hugged back. She didn't cry, but she held on for a moment with both hands gripping the back of Ruth's sweater, and then she let go and walked to the truck. She put her backpack and her bag in the back seat. She climbed up into the passenger seat with some effort, it was a tall truck, and pulled the door shut. She looked at Wade. "Ready?" he said. "Ready," she said. They drove through Tucson in the clear March morning, and Lily looked out the window at the city that had, until recently, been a series of temporary addresses. The university buildings along the east side, the Congress Street district with its old brick facades, The stretch of speedway that included Pearl's diner, which Lily pointed out with clear satisfaction. "Pearl said she's going to teach me to make pie," she announced. "She'll do it too," Wade said. "Pearl follows through." Lily seemed to note this. People who follow through. She was building a list, he suspected, of things that had turned out to be real. He pulled into the driveway of the house on the southeast side. The yard was not remarkable. Gravel and a mesquite tree and a prickly pear cactus near the gate. But in the corner near the fence, where the sun hit longest, Wade had built a small raised garden bed from cedar planks and filled it with soil from the nursery on Kolb Road, because Ms. Flores had told Sandra, who had told Wade, that Lily liked plants and had been sad when the Garcia's garden went unwatered. She saw it when she got out of the truck. She walked over to it without speaking, crouched down, touched the soil, which was dark and damp from watering that morning. "What are we going to grow?" she asked. "That's up to you," he said. "I bought a few seed packets, but you pick." She stood up and looked at the house, then at the yard, then at Wade. "I'm going to need to know your rules," she said. "Each place has different rules, and I don't always know what's wrong until I've already done it." "That's fair," he said. "We'll write them down, so you can check." She nodded, filing this, then looking back at the garden bed. "Can we get tomatoes, the kind you eat warm off the vine?" "First thing tomorrow," he said. She picked up her backpack. He took the grocery bag. They walked to the door together. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no music, no ceremony, no speech about new beginnings. Just a man with a complicated past, and a girl with a complicated history, and a door between them, and whatever came next. Wade had spent 26 years on the road because roads don't ask you to stay. He'd kept moving because stopping meant being seen, fully seen, and being seen meant being known, and being known had always felt, in the wordless part of him he'd never examined too closely, like an invitation to disappointment. Lily Bennett, 7 years old, had looked at everything the world used to judge him and decided he was worth asking. He pushed open the door. She walked inside. It was, he would think later, the bravest thing he had ever done. Not the years on the road, not the hard nights, not the decisions he'd made and lived with. This, standing still, letting someone in. Outside, the desert bloomed anyway, indifferent to what people thought it was capable of, doing quietly what it had always done when the season was right.